She woke with soil against her lips and the taste of dust caught in her throat, her whole body shaking like it had been torn apart and hastily put back together. Morning light blazed over her, hot and merciless, as if the sun itself wanted to finish what the man in the dark had started. Anna Harper tried to push herself up, but her leg buckled so hard she dropped back into the weeds, breath catching in short, broken bursts. Her torn veil lay a few feet away, snagged on a dead branch like it had tried to run for its life. Her habit, the cloth she had worn with devotion for years, was shredded across the field in pieces that looked like they had been thrown by a storm. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. All she had left were 3 broad leaves she clutched against her trembling skin, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold them in place. She had spent her life praying, but nothing had prepared her for the sound of a man laughing while ripping the last pieces of faith off her body. Nothing had prepared her for the weight of him, the cruelty he carried like a second face, or the way she had begged God to make her disappear. And nothing prepared her for the moment he simply walked away, leaving her in the dirt like she wasn't worth another second of his time. The Kansas heat wrapped around her like a punishment. Every step sent fire ripping through her bruises. Every dry gust of wind felt like fingers brushing her exposed skin. She stumbled across the open field, pressing the leaves tighter to her chest, whispering prayers she could barely remember. Tears blurred her sight, but when her vision finally sharpened, she saw a tall chestnut horse and beside a man, broad-shouldered, late 50s, sun-worn face, sleeves pushed up, boots dusty from a long ride. John Carter. She didn't know his name yet, only that he turned at the sound of her broken footsteps. He didn't flinch. He didn't stare like other men did when they saw a woman vulnerable. He stepped toward her slowly, one hand raising in a calm, steady gesture. But to Anna, any hand reaching toward her was the same hand that had dragged her into the dark. Panic tore through her chest. She stumbled back and cried out with a voice that cracked under terror. "Please, don't do that. Don't do anything forbidden." John froze immediately, lowering his hand carefully like he was approaching a wild animal, not a wounded woman. She shook so hard her teeth rattled, terrified she had escaped one monster only to fall into another shadow. He didn't speak right away. He just took off his long coat, laid it on the ground between them, and said gently, "Take it if you want. No rush." She watched him with the fear of someone who expected traps everywhere. But his eyes held only exhaustion and quiet kindness. After a long moment, she stepped forward, grabbed the coat, and wrapped it tightly around herself. Something in her loosened, not fully, just enough to let her breathe. John turned away and walked toward his horse so she wouldn't feel cornered. He led her toward his ranch at a pace slow enough for her to follow, never once looking back at her exposed fear. The wind itself seemed to soften as they made their way across the fields. When they reached the ranch, Martha, a tough older widow with more heart than most towns, rushed out and pulled Anna inside. Warm water, clean clothes, a quiet place to sit. Simple kindness, but to Anna it felt like being lifted out of a grave. John stepped back outside, saying he'd ride for the sheriff. Before leaving, he paused at the door and asked softly, "You all right with Martha? Want me to stay a minute?" She whispered, "Go." Inside, Anna tried to steady her shaking breath, tried to push the night out of her mind, but peace slipped away faster than she could hold it. Then she heard hoofsteps, a voice that froze her blood colder than a well in winter. She moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. There he was, the man who had dragged her into the dark. Hank Briggs, smiling, talking to John like they were old friends. Anna dropped the curtain. Her knees nearly gave out, because if the devil stood in your yard wearing a friendly grin, what then? Anna pressed her back to the wall, her breath shaking out of her chest in thin, uneven gasps. She didn't need to look again to know Hank Briggs was still standing outside. She could hear his voice, smooth, warm, polite, the kind of voice that fooled everyone except the one who had seen its true shape in the dark. The room seemed smaller with every sound he made. Martha tried to coax her into a chair, but Anna whispered, "He's here. He's right outside." Martha stiffened, then peeked through the curtain with a squint only tough women carried. "Lord help us," she muttered under her breath. "That man looks like trouble wearing a hat." Outside, John stood with his arms folded, legs planted firm in the dirt, listening to Hank spin lies with the confidence of someone used to being believed. Hank claimed he was searching for a missing horse, said it had run off in the night. He suggested maybe the strange woman folks had seen wandering the fields had spooked the animal, and he just wanted to make sure John wasn't harboring unwanted trouble. The smile he gave afterward was the kind that made a horse kick the stall door. When Hank hinted that Anna should come out and clear up the confusion, John stepped forward, boots grinding into the dust. "She's resting," he said flatly. "Take your questions to the sheriff." Hank's smile faltered. He didn't like being denied. Instead of pushing harder, he softened his voice, acting concerned. He suggested Anna might not be who she said she was. Maybe she had caused problems back at the church. Maybe she wasn't telling the truth. That was the line John wouldn't let anyone cross. He grabbed Hank by the shirt and pulled him in close, his voice low enough to make the air tighten. "You need to leave my land. Now." Hank shoved him back with a hard, practiced motion. The two younger ranch hands with him jumped off their horses, boots hitting the ground like trouble had finally arrived. Dust swirled around them, and the yard felt like it was bracing for something ugly. Anna watched through the door crack as the men circled each other. One of Hank's men swung and caught John square in the face, knocking him to a knee. Blood ran from his nose, dripping into the dirt. But John rose again, wiped the blood with the back of his hand, grabbed Hank by the collar, and slammed him into the ground. Voices rose, fists flew, boots struck dust into the air so thick it looked like the world blurred. John held on to Hank like a man who had seen enough wrong in his life and refused to let more walk freely across his land. Through split lips, he growled, "Get off my property." By the time the sheriff thundered into the yard, John was bleeding from his cheek and nose. Hank was pinned in the dirt cursing, and the ranch looked like it had been hit by a storm. But the real storm wasn't the fight. It was the look Hank gave Anna through the cracked door. A small, cold smile. A promise without words. Because a man like Hank never let humiliation go. Not when a woman pointed at him. Not when a town stood between them. The sheriff separated them, yelling loud enough to shake the fence rails, and ordered Hank off the property. Hank spat blood and said he'd be back. The words slid through the air like a blade. John finally came inside, wiping the last of the blood from his face. Anna grabbed his sleeve with both hands, whispering, "That's him. That's the man who dragged me away." Her voice trembled like a trapped bird trying to beat itself free. John didn't question her. He didn't doubt her. He just rested a hand gently on her shoulder and said, "Then we won't let him near you again." But deep down, Anna knew the truth. Men like Hank didn't walk away. They circled. They waited. They made sure everyone heard their version of the story first. And in a place as small as Dodge City, lives traveled faster than horses. And by sunrise, they did. By the next morning, Dodge City felt different, quieter in a way that made the air heavier. News had already spread, twisted and stretched by people who hadn't seen a thing but spoke like they had. Anna felt every whisper like a hand brushing against a bruise. Martha set a plate in front of her, warm biscuits and honey, but Anna's hands shook too badly to lift a fork. "You're safe here," Martha said softly, pulling out the chair beside her. "Let folks talk. They get loud when they're scared of their own boredom." Anna tried to smile, but it broke halfway. She had lived her whole life believing people in small towns looked after each other. But now she felt their stares through the walls, like they were already deciding what kind of woman she must be. A fallen one? A liar? A stranger with something to hide? She whispered, "I didn't do anything wrong." And Martha squeezed her hand. "Child, folks don't need truth to pass judgment. They only need each other." Outside, John was patching a fence post, moving slower than usual from the bruises blooming across his jaw. Every hit he'd taken the day before was showing now. Darkening his skin like shadows were settling into him. Anna watched him through the window for a moment. He didn't look back. He didn't want to crowd her. But she could still feel the things he wasn't saying, the worry he carried, the way he kept checking the yard every few minutes like he was expecting Hank to ride back in. And he wasn't wrong. By noon, riders were already passing the ranch just to look. People didn't even pretend they were just passing through. One woman sat straight in her saddle, staring at Anna through the window like she was inspecting a stain on a dress. Anna stepped back, her breath tightening. "I feel like I'm drowning, and I'm not even in water," she whispered. Martha's voice softened. "You were hurt, and your heart's still bleeding. Let yourself feel it. You don't have to be brave every second." But that was the part Anna didn't know how to do. She didn't know how to exist without pretending she was still whole. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like Hank. Every moment alone felt like a doorway someone could drag her through. That afternoon, the sheriff rode up. John met him outside, wiping sweat from his brow. Anna stayed on the porch steps, close enough to hear them, but far enough to run inside if she needed to. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. Town stirred up. "Hank's been talking, saying she's lying, saying you're hiding something." John's jaw tightened. "And you believe him?" "John, I believe what I saw yesterday. Hank doesn't pick fights unless he's covering something ugly." Anna closed her hands into fists. Her fingers felt cold. The sheriff looked at her then, really looked for the first time. Not like a lawman trying to get facts. Like a man realizing a storm had passed right through her. His voice lowered. "You all right, miss?" Anna swallowed. Her throat ached. "I don't know how to be all right anymore." The sheriff nodded slowly. "That's honest. And honest is something Hank don't have." But even with his kindness, fear still crawled under her skin. People didn't see what Hank had done. They didn't hear her begging. They didn't feel his hands. They only heard his voice, smooth, steady, practiced. And in a place where men like him were known, a woman's word weighed less than dust on a boot. That night, long after the lamps were blown out, Anna couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, arms wrapped around herself so tightly her shoulders trembled. The moonlight coming through the window felt sharper than it should, like it was cutting the room in half. She kept hearing Hank's laughter in her memory, the way he'd walked away without looking back. She wondered how someone could be so certain he'd never be held accountable. Maybe it was because he knew exactly how a town like this worked. Maybe he knew how easily people doubted a woman who couldn't even stand steady on her own feet. She pressed her hands to her face and whispered to the empty room, "I just want my life back." But out here, wanting something didn't mean the world would give it to you. Sunday morning came too bright, too loud, too soon. The church bell rang through the valley like it was calling every soul to witness something Anna wasn't sure she was strong enough to face. She stood at the doorway of the ranch house, fingers gripping the frame, her breath uneven as she watched people ride toward town in small groups. John tightened the cinch on his saddle, glancing toward her once, careful, almost hesitant. "You don't have to go," he said. "No one expects you to stand in front of those folks today." Anna swallowed hard. Her voice barely made it out. "I need to know if God still sees me." Martha slipped her arm around Anna's gently, like she was guiding a child through deep water. "Then we'll walk together." Inside the church, every head turned the moment they stepped through the doors. The air felt thick with dust and judgment, the kind that settled in your lungs and stayed there. Anna tried to keep her eyes forward, but the whispers made her skin prickle. A few women pulled their children closer. A man shook his head like he already knew her story better than she did. And standing near the front, wearing his Sunday best and a smile polished to perfection, was Hank Briggs. He didn't look at her the way he had that night in the field. No hunger, no cruelty, just a neighborly grin that twisted her stomach. He rested a hand on the pew, leaned slightly forward, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I think the young lady owes the town an explanation." The church went dead silent. Even the light coming through the stained glass windows seemed to pause. Anna's knees weakened, but she didn't fall. Something inside her, something bruised, something trembling, pushed her forward. Step by step, she moved toward the front, Martha's hand brushing her back like a steadying whisper. Her voice broke at first. Then, slowly, it settled thin but steady. "I was walking the road. He took me, dragged me into the field. He tore my clothes. He left me there." She had to stop to breathe. Her chest felt tight, like she was forcing words through a wound. People stared. A few gasped. One older woman muttered something ugly behind her hand. But Anna didn't stop. She spoke Hank's name. The sound of it in that quiet room was like snapping a rope. Hank's smile wavered, barely, but it wavered. Then, from a middle pew, a young ranch hand stood up. Tom Hayes, barely more than a boy, his hands twisting his hat. His face had gone pale, but his voice was clear. "I saw it," he said. "I saw Hank pull her off the road. I didn't do anything then, but I ain't staying quiet now." Gasps. Murmurs. People shifting, unsure, unsettled. A few men stood to get a better look. A woman pressed her fingers to her mouth. Hank's eyes darted toward the exit, then toward Anna, then toward John, who was rising slowly from his seat, jaw set, ready to break the world in half if the man tried to run. The sheriff stepped down the aisle, hand resting on his weapon. "Hank," he said calmly, "you're coming with me." Hank tried to push past him, tried to make for the door. But John stepped in his path, blocking him without a word. Just standing there, steady and unmovable, like someone who'd already decided nothing was taking Anna's truth away again. Hank stopped. His chest rose and fell too fast. His face twisted, not in fear, but in rage that someone had finally challenged him. The sheriff grabbed his arm. The crowd erupted. Voices shouted, some in anger, some in shame, some in relief that the truth had surfaced in daylight. Hank spat a thin line of blood and swore he'd be back, swore none of this was over. But his words hit the floor like broken glass as the sheriff pulled him out through the double doors. The heavy slam of the church doors echoed long after he was gone. Anna stood there trembling, hands clasped in front of her, tears streaking down her cheeks. For the first time since that night, the room didn't feel like it was closing in. She felt air move again, felt her lungs open. John walked toward her, slow and careful, like he didn't want to startle her. She looked up at him, voice barely a whisper. "I'm not who I was. I don't feel worthy of anything anymore." John shook his head with quiet conviction. "Worth ain't something the world gets to hand out, Anna. It's something you carry, even when someone tries to tear it off you." Something inside her shifted, small, fragile, but real, like a window cracking open after a long winter. She wasn't healed, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. The seasons changed slowly on the prairie, the way old wounds closed, quietly, without announcement, without asking permission. By the time spring softened into summer again, a whole year had passed since the night Hank Briggs dragged Anna from the road. Her nightmares didn't vanish, not completely. Some nights, she still woke with her hand over her mouth, terrified to make a sound. But those nights became fewer. The shadows in her mind weren't as sharp, not with Martha's steady presence and John checking the yard every evening before sundown. Life didn't go back to what it was, but it formed something new, something careful, something tender. Anna learned to tend the garden behind the ranch house. She planted tomatoes that grew in crooked rows and wildflowers that sprang up in places she hadn't intended. Martha teased her gently, saying the garden looked like a joyful mess made by someone who survived a storm. Anna didn't mind. She liked not being perfect. Perfection had never saved her. During the afternoons, she volunteered at the small schoolhouse. The children took to her instantly, tugging at her sleeves and asking her to read stories. They didn't look at her with pity. They didn't whisper her name like it was a rumor. They just saw her as someone kind, someone who listened. One little girl asked her quietly, "Miss Anna, why do you look sad sometimes?" Anna knelt beside her and said, "Because sad things happened, but I'm learning not to let them win." The child nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. John watched all of this from a respectful distance. He wasn't a man who rushed. He woke early, fed the horses, fixed fences, and helped Anna haul water for her flower beds. He had a way of standing near her without crowding her, of speaking without pressing. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she didn't yet know how to name, gentle, heavy with something unspoken. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch sipping coffee after supper, Anna noticed him rubbing his shoulder in slow circles. The fight with Hank had left a mark that still bothered him during weather changes. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. He blinked, surprised she'd noticed. "Only when I pretend I'm still 20. She smiled softly. You've done more for me than I can ever repay. John shook his head. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted to make sure you felt safe again. Anna hesitated, fingers brushing the rim of her mug. I do feel safe mostly, but sometimes I wonder if I deserve it. John's voice dropped, steady as ever. Everyone deserves to feel safe, Anna, even when they don't believe it. She looked away, her throat tightening. When I think about that day, sometimes I still feel like the world sees me as broken. He leaned forward a little, just enough that she felt the sincerity in every word. You lived through hell. That doesn't make you broken. It makes you strong. His words didn't erase her pain, but they lit something inside her, small but glowing, like a lantern in a far corner of a room she thought would always stay dark. Over time, she noticed how John's hands lingered an extra second when he passed her a tool. How he smiled whenever she laughed, even a little. How his voice softened when he said her name. One evening, when the sky was painted red and gold, Anna found herself standing beside him as he fixed the gate latch. She watched his fingers steady the hinge, watched the way the fading sunlight touched the silver strands in his beard. She felt a flutter, not fear, not panic, but something gentle, something she thought she'd lost forever. He glanced at her, catching the way she was looking at him. Instead of stepping away, he held her gaze. You're thinking about something, he said quietly. She swallowed. I think I'm starting to see the world differently. He waited, patient as always. And I'm starting to see myself differently, too. A breeze moved through her hair. The moment felt fragile, like a bird perched on an open palm. John didn't reach for her. He didn't push the moment forward. He simply said, in a voice that felt like home, "Take your time, Anna. I'm not going anywhere." And she believed him. For the first time in her life, she believed someone wouldn't leave. The week after Hank's arrest felt strange, like the world was trying to decide whether it wanted to calm down or explode again. The sheriff had taken him straight to the county jail, but fear didn't disappear just because a man was behind iron bars. Not in a place like Dodge City. Not when lies traveled faster than any rider on the prairie. Anna stayed close to the ranch house those days. She helped Martha knead dough in the mornings, though her hands often trembled so much the flour scattered across the table like snow. Martha pretended not to notice, humming softly while guiding Anna's hands the way one would guide a child learning to walk. You're doing fine, she'd say, even when Anna felt anything but fine. But the moment Anna stepped outside, the world changed. People stopped their wagons just to stare. A rancher rode past slow enough to get a full look at her face, then muttered under his breath as if she couldn't hear him. Two women at the general store didn't hide their whispers. That's her. John's protecting her like she's family. I heard she tempted Hank. The words dug under her skin, sharp and cold. She kept her eyes down, hands tight around the basket she carried. She wanted to shrink, disappear, become invisible. Anything to stop feeling like a walking scandal. When she returned to the ranch, John was repairing the corral fence. He looked up at her, concern passing through his eyes like a shadow. They giving you trouble? She hesitated, then shook her head. They just look at me like I'm something to talk about. John's jaw worked, but he didn't speak anger out loud. Instead, he set his hammer down and brushed the dust off his hands. Anna, folks who don't know the truth speak the loudest. Don't let their noise become your truth. His words settled somewhere deep inside her, but they didn't erase the ache. Shame wasn't a thing you could wash off with warm water. It lingered. It followed. It whispered. That night, Anna couldn't sleep again. The house was quiet except for the soft creak of old wood and Martha's faint snore from down the hall. Anna sat by the window, watching the moonlight fall over the grass like silver paint. She felt small, fragile, but also tired of feeling small. A gentle knock sounded on her doorframe. John stood there, not stepping in, just leaning his shoulder against the wall. He held 2 mugs of warm tea. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. No, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, it's like I'm back in that field. He nodded slowly and stepped closer, offering her a mug. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth settle into her fingers. You know, he said softly, you're allowed to take time. Healing don't follow anyone's schedule. Anna let out a shaky breath. I don't know how to be normal again. John took a seat in the chair across from her. His knees cracked as he settled in, and he muttered, "Getting old is a punishment I wouldn't wish on anyone." She let out a small, unexpected laugh. It felt strange, like using muscles she hadn't moved in a long time. "You ain't broken," he said. "You're hurt. Big difference." Anna looked down at her hands. Her fingers were still trembling, but not as violently. "Sometimes I feel ruined." John shook his head. "You're standing here, aren't you? That alone means you're stronger than what happened." A silence filled the room. Warm, soft, not heavy like before. She sipped the tea and felt the heat spread through her chest. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. His answer came without hesitation. "Because someone should have been there for you when Hank took you. Someone wasn't. I can't change that. But I can be here now." Her eyes burned with tears she didn't want to let fall, but one slipped out anyway. John didn't reach for her or try to wipe it away. He just sat there, letting her know she didn't have to hide her pain. And for the first time, she felt something that wasn't fear or shame. She felt seen. The year turned again, almost without Anna noticing. Trees along the edge of the property shifted from deep green to gold, then bare, then grew new leaves like they'd been reborn. She liked watching them change. Somehow it reminded her she wasn't stuck in one season either. Her life at the ranch settled into a rhythm, watering plants at sunrise, helping Martha with chores, teaching the children in the afternoons, and sitting on the porch with John in the evenings. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just simple things that made her feel human again. But healing didn't erase everything. Some days Anna moved like she was made of soft clay, ready to fall apart at one wrong word. Other days, she felt whole enough to laugh without covering her mouth. And John was always there, steady, patient, never asking for more than she could give. He had become the quiet constant in her days. One evening, she found him in the barn repairing a saddle strap. The lantern light cast a warm glow across his face, making the lines around his eyes look softer. Anna stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure if she should break the silence. He looked up and gave her that small half-smile she had come to trust. "Couldn't sleep?" "No," she said. "My thoughts wouldn't settle." He nodded knowingly. "They do that, especially when you're holding things in." She stepped closer, fingers nervously fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Do you ever wonder why you're alone?" she asked. "Why life didn't work out differently?" John let out a slow breath, leaning back on the stool. "I used to, but after a while, I realized some things fall apart so the right ones can find their way." Anna's heart tugged at the edges. "Do you think I'm one of those things? Something that happened for a reason?" He studied her gently. "I think you're someone who deserved peace long before she found it." The barn felt too quiet suddenly, too warm, too full of words she wasn't sure how to say. She took another step, standing only a foot from him now. "John, I'm learning how to breathe again," she whispered. "And I think you're part of that." He set the strap down slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to startle her. "Anna, I care about you. You know that. But I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything." "I don't," she said quickly. "It's not about owing. It's about choosing." John blinked, taken off guard. "Choosing." She nodded, her pulse loud enough in her ears that she almost couldn't hear her own voice. "I've spent so long feeling like my life ended that night. But maybe it didn't. Maybe something new started here. With you." Silence settled between them, thick and tender. John looked down for a moment, exhaling shakily. When he lifted his gaze again, there was something vulnerable there, something rare for a man who spent his life biting down his feelings. "Anna," he said quietly, "I don't want to hurt you by hoping for something too soon." She reached out, hesitant, trembling, and touched the back of his hand. Just a touch, barely anything, but it felt like a door opening. "I'm not breaking," she whispered. "I'm changing, and I think I'm allowed to love again." The words came out before she could second-guess them. She felt heat rise to her face, her breath catching in her throat. John's eyes softened with something deep, something she couldn't name before this moment. He turned his hand over and let his fingers brush hers. His voice lowered to a near whisper. "Do you mean that, Anna?" She nodded, tears blurring the edges of her sight. "I love you. I love the man who didn't look at me with questions. The man who stood between me and the darkness." The man who made me believe I wasn't ruined. John closed his eyes for a long, steady moment. When he opened them, there was no hesitation left. Then stay, he murmured. Not because you need a place, but because you deserve one. A sob slipped from her chest. Not a pain, but relief. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her carefully, like holding something you don't want the world to break again. Outside, the night hummed with crickets. The lantern flickered. The barn smelled of hay and warm earth. And for the first time in a long time, Anna felt like her life belonged to her again. They married in late summer, on a warm afternoon when the cottonwoods along the river swayed like they were whispering blessings into the wind. The ceremony wasn't grand. Just a few neighbors, Martha in her best dress, a preacher who spoke with a kind voice, and John standing tall beside Anna with a look that made her feel safer than any church wall ever had. Anna wore a simple blue dress Martha had sewn by hand. John looked at her like he was seeing something he had been waiting his whole life to find. When she slipped her hand into his, her fingers stopped shaking for the first time in months. They exchanged vows quietly, not for the crowd, but for each other. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Anna felt a warmth bloom in her chest, so strong she thought her ribs might break from it. The townspeople, yes, even the ones who once whispered, showed up with gifts of food, blankets, and flowers. People have a way of coming around when truth shows itself in daylight. A few apologized in awkward murmurs. Others simply smiled in a way that said they finally understood. Life on the ranch moved forward in peaceful, ordinary ways. Anna spent her mornings in the garden and her afternoons teaching the children at the schoolhouse. John worked the fields and came home with dirt on his boots and stories from the day. They shared dinners on the porch, talked until the stars blinked awake, and held on to each other on nights when the past tried to come back in dreams. Healing didn't erase what had happened. It didn't magically wipe the pain clean. Some shadows still flickered at the edges of Anna's mind. Some nights she still woke breathless. But every time she did, John was there, steady, patient, warm, reminding her she wasn't alone in the dark anymore. One evening, long after sunset, Anna stood at the edge of the property watching the fireflies dance. The air was still, the sky deep blue. She felt John come up behind her, his hand brushing hers lightly. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I was thinking about how far I've come. How far we've come." John smiled. "You're stronger than you know, Anna." She looked up at him, her voice soft but certain. "I used to think what happened to me meant my life was over, that I'd never be whole again. But I learned something here with you." He waited, his quiet attention wrapping around her like a warm coat. Anna took a breath. "I learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to live again, even when you're still afraid." John's eyes softened. "You've done more than live again. You've built a life." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood together in the fading light, the fireflies glowing around them like tiny lanterns leading them forward. Anna whispered, "I used to feel like no one believed me, like my voice didn't matter. And now?" John asked gently. She squeezed his hand. "Now I know one person believing you can change everything." John kissed the top of her head, his voice low and full. "You deserve to be believed from the start." She closed her eyes, letting the quiet settle into her bones. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace, not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from being seen, heard, and held. And there, standing under the soft summer sky, she found the moral she hadn't known she was searching for. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to stand with you, one person to choose truth over comfort, one heart brave enough to say, "I believe you." And when that happens, the world doesn't just get quieter, it gets kinder.